Um, how's everybody doing? Last talk of the day. People relaxed, chill, ready to schmooze, network, maybe even, pun not intended. So today I'll be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of DoH and DoT, or DOT. Just a quick poll before we start. How many people know DNS, know how DNS works? High level, okay, good, a sizable portion. Now, Men and Mice is a company that's been around for, just over 30 years, which is interesting given that DNS itself was created in 1987, so 3 years before Men and Mice was founded. So Men and Mice has been around basically for the entire duration of the internet as we know it, which is kind of scary, at least to me. I don't know how many of you actually were born when DNS was created, but it's been a while. 2 years now, 3 years. So we focus on DNS. So today I'm going to talk about DoH and DoT. Just a quick refresher how DNS resolution works. So in this particular example, you have some person sitting at their computer that wants to access Google's website. So they punch in google.com, which now goes to what's called a DNS resolver. And the resolver says, okay, you want to connect to google.com. What is the IP address? It goes to the root server, asks it, so where can I find the server responsible.com? Then asks the .com name server, and then .com name server replies, here you go, this is where Microsoft.com is, and then you go to, then the resolver goes to Microsoft.com and asks, okay, Google.com and asks, so what's the IP address of www.google.com? And that IP address is then fed back to the browser, which finally connects to the Google web server. Everybody with me so far? So this is an example of a DNS query. Incidentally, to google.com. It has a bunch of flags, bunch of configurations, but the core is google.com, the name of the domain. This is the response. Same information, indicates that this is actually a response, not the query, and has the answers, which is, you can see here at the bottom, it has 3 answers. One of them, each one of them has the IP addresses that the client asked for. Anybody notice anything suspicious about this? Any red flags going, or alarm bells ringing saying, This is all in clear text sent over the wire, which may be a challenge, right? Because what happens now if somebody, let's say, manages to spoof the domain name server? So when you ask for google.com and it gives you back the IP address, it could give you whatever IP address it wants, which means that when you connect, innocently believing that you're connecting to google.com, you're actually connecting to wherever the malicious entity wants you to connect to. Now, this was something pointed out relatively early. So people tried to fix that with something called DNSSEC. So how many people have heard of DNSSEC? Okay, it's about 1/3 or so. So the whole idea with DNSSEC is the guarantee that what you get back from the domain name server can be trusted. And the way they did that, by basically building this chain of certificates down from the root server to the top-level domain server to the domain server, which would be Google's name server. So you can kind of build this chain of trust that gives you the confidence and the belief that, yes, this is actually the right person or the right entity that's giving me the IP address that I want. There's a problem, though, still. And the problem is that the query and the response is still sent in clear text, which means that you could actually see what people are looking at and connecting to. So this is in 2003 or so, the DNSSEC was defined. Now, and then in 2013, this guy called Edward Snowden popped up. Took a trip to Hong Kong and there were some revelations. And one of those revelations that there was a significant amount of passive surveillance, that there were entities that could actually watch and see what people were connecting to. Now, they couldn't actually see the data after they committed because that was protected with HTTPS. But the queries, still sent in clear text, so anybody that could kind of snoop at the wire, look at the wire, they could see where you were connecting to. For many people, that's fine. For some people, it's not so fine that it's public knowledge that you're looking at that site or doing that activity. So there was a task force created by the IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, called DPrive, or DNS Privacy. And it was tasked with fixing this. And hence, DNS over TLS, or DoT, was born. So the interesting thing here, so if you just take a quick look at how DoT works, there's a dedicated TCP port, 853, where the client connects to the resolver using TLS. So that's encrypted. Then from the resolver, it works the same way as before. It goes to the root name server, then the top level name server, and then to the domain you actually want to go to server, in this case, example.com. The second part of the journey in the current incarnation of DNS over TLS, or DoT, only the first part between the client and the resolver is encrypted, not the second part. So I can happily say that there is an effort ongoing to fix that, to basically make sure that the end-to-end journey of the request is encrypted, but we're not quite there yet. After only, what, 5 years, 6 years now, this year? So things move slowly in this world, right? There are engineering task force that meet, and there's proposals back and forth. So 5 years, it's a nominal time for these kinds of things. Another interesting thing that happened is that Facebook and Cloudflare, they built a pilot, they built a prototype where if you connect through Facebook using Cloudflare as a resolver, paths 6 and 7, they're also encrypted. But it was a pilot, it was a proof of concept, because they need to figure out, is it worthwhile? I mean, what's the trade-off? You're trading security and anonymity for possible overhead, and how significant is that overhead? So that was what that pilot was meant to figure out. And turns out that the overhead was nominal. So they considered that pilot to be successful. So like I said, dedicated TCP port 853. There are two ways of connecting. There's the strict and then the opportunistic. The strict means that if you cannot connect through TCP port 853, you just don't connect at all. While opportunistic has the kind of possibility of downgrading to the normal DNS over port 53, the unencrypted ones. So it's straightforward. It fixes the first half of the leg. So when you're sitting in the coffee shop, you can be secure in the knowledge that the owner of the coffee shop is not snooping on you. So hopefully that means that passive surveillance is gone, right? Well, not quite. So as I pointed out, the second half of the lag is not yet encrypted. There are no native implementation as of yet in the most common platforms, Windows, Mac OS, and iOS. So this is something that you need to install on yourself with packages like Stubby. It's not hard to do, but there's some lag between what the industry is offering and the native support for this. Now, this is one port, which means that it can be easily blocked. If you block the port, and if you're running opportunistic, then you just be downgraded to a regular, plain old, unencrypted DNS queries. So it's easy to turn this off, which may not be what you quite want. Then there's this thing called split horizon DNS. Now, how many of you know what that is? Okay, 2 people. I'm getting down there, right in the weeds, starting with about 2/3, then 1/3, and now 2 people. So split horizon is if you actually want to have different resolution depending on if you're inside the network or outside the network. So let's say you run a company and you have your own network, and if somebody goes to api.mycompany.com, it goes to one address. But if you're outside of the network and you type in api.mycompany.com, you go to a different IP address. So this is split horizon, basically the same name resolving to two different IP addresses. Now with DNS over TLS, there's the challenge of a possible so-called hairpin turn, meaning you go outside of the network and then you go right back in. So that's a challenge that needs to be overcome. Then there's this thing called SNI leaks. SNI, who knows what that is? Okay, a little bit more, good. So SNI. When you're delivering, let's say you're a post office person and you're delivering mail to an apartment building, the address of the apartment building is not enough. Just like when you're talking to a server, the IP of the server may not be enough. Because like an apartment building with multiple apartments, one server, one IP address can actually have multiple domains. So when that happened, people thought, okay, what do we do? I know, aha, let's add this thing called SNI, which is the server name indication, which is basically kind of which apartment do you want to go to, or which service or domain do you want to connect to. And this is important because when you want to establish a secure handshake with TLS, you need to get the certificate for the domain. So if you have multiple domains, you need to know which one it is. So the whole spiel we did with DNS over TLS is possibly undone because if you're going to kind of the apartment complex type of an IP address, you need to give which domain you're connecting to anyway. And this is part of the TLS handshake, which means it's clear text. So we're kind of screwed in terms of monitoring, right? Well, I'm glad to say that there is something to address that. It is a proof of concept still, but it's basically called eSNI or encrypted SNI, where, as always, DNS plays a big role. So that's kind of in the works, but it's looking pretty good at the moment. So I talked about how things moved glacially slow typically in this industry. And then there's DNS over HTTPS. So about 18, 20 months ago, this idea came up that, hang on, we don't need to have a dedicated TLS TCP port 853 to do these DNS queries. Let's just piggyback on top of HTTPS, which uses port 443. And that port can't be blocked by anybody because it's all HTTPS traffic. If you're going to block that, then you basically can't access the web in any secure way. So this was created. It's kind of driven by Mozilla and Cloudflare. And the idea is you can have strict connections using port 443 or mixed connections, where it's kind of the DNS queries are mixed in with the regular HTTPS traffic. So there are definitely benefits, but as always, there are also downsides. Web applications. You can now embed into the web applications the ability to do DNS lookups on the fly. You can build into web servers the ability to do DNS queries on the fly. So if you connect to your bank, and the bank, let's say, may have external references that need to be cleared, the bank server itself, without going to a third party, can resolve those DNS queries inside the bank web server, which is kind of cool. That means you can have more efficient applications. And since this is HTTPS, which means HTTP/2, it means the server can push resolution of queries without actually being asked those queries. Kind of the server push features. So this is a lot more forward-looking. This came to being about 18, 20 months ago, and there's already an RFC approved. So it's moving fast. But, as always, there's a but. What are the downsides? So this is still early. This is still new. We still haven't grasped all the implications of this. Now, for the people that manage enterprise networks, they're probably cringing in fear right now because it means they have very limited ability to control things because they won't have the visibility into what's going on this HTTPS port unless they do kind of TLS interception. Then there's this guy. Who knows that guy? No one. Yes, I managed to succeed. So this is Paul Vixie. Paul Vixie this is taken from Face of Open Source. He is the author of the DNS protocol back in 1987. And he is the founder of ISC, and he is one of the creators of Bind. Bind is one of the most popular DNS servers there are. So his opinion should have some weight. What do you think? Do you think he's for or against this? For or against? What do you think? Against. Bingo. He's vehemently against this. He basically says, and I quote, "The inmates are now running the asylum." So he's kind of the pragmatic type that runs networks, and he sees the implications to administering a network. And he says that the thought, while noble, not everybody, in fact, more than the majority of internet users live in restrictive environments, restrictive countries that put real limits on what you can do, that this is solving a problem for them that is impacting the management of networks too much. Mozilla and Cloudflare, they are running this. So what did they do? They basically built, there was a nightly build on Mozilla that went out that by default use DoH to do DNS resolution, which meant that it completely ignored whatever settings you had in your host file, whatever operating system settings, it ignored them and always used what they call the trusted recursive resolver, which for them was Cloudflare. That is a little bit scary in many people's minds because now you have no control over who is doing the resolution. And I can assure you, Cloudflare is not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They see a business opportunity. They see, possibly, information that they can capture to know who is querying what, because now everything goes through them. And that means there's a risk of centralization of resolution. Now I'm kind of stepping at what kind of society do we want to have on the internet in the years going forward? Do we want to allow that? Do we want to build structures in place where there is increased momentum towards centralization? And that is a question that is still unanswered. So where does that leave us? Well, interesting enough, DNS has been around for a while, but it's changing. It's moving actually quite fast. 18 to 20 months, that's kind of lightning speed in this industry, in this environment. SNI leaks issues are being addressed, and people are working on how can we add and improve visibility for DoH, DNS over HTTPS. Both those developments are making the internet safer and are in fact pretty much, it's a benefit for people as consumers. The internet is becoming a safer, more higher performing place. There's an argument to be made that kind of on-premise enterprises will gravitate towards DoT, while web application-based, cloud-based enterprises or developers will gravitate towards DoH. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? We don't really need one protocol to rule them all, presumably. So what can we do next? What should we do next? More pilots, more people participating, more awareness, more education. I mean, we're now in a phase where we're making decisions that could impact where we're headed going forward. So by all means, participate. Domain blocking, what should be the structure in place for that? There was a recent court decision here in Iceland where a specific domain was blocked Is that the right thing to do? When can that be done? When can that not be done? Make sure that those settings are in place. How does GDPR affect this? And we really should be asking as a society for strong legally binding responsibility statements, especially from those centralized resolvers. If you want more information, which I hope you want, I can recommend RIPE 78. RIPE 78 will be held here in Iceland, in Reykjavik, in May this year. We're actually one of our own, Karsten Strootman, will be giving a talk. And he's one of those deep dive experts. He's probably forgotten more than I know about DNS. So he's that good. I'll be around. We have a booth outside. So if you have questions, please stop by. Otherwise, thank you.